personal accountability, that my word is my bond. And if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, that I honor my commitments. I feel doubly responsible for that one because I feel like, look, I'm teaching people these principles, and if I don't model them, this whole thing is a giant waste of time. It's like I'm a snake oil salesman. I mean, I get that, it's easier to talk about. So I feel like I've got to live this stuff. So for me, it's about personal accountability. That is by far the first thing. I love the quote from Albert Schweitzer, who said, example is not the main thing in influencing others. It's the only thing. So it's just like so I just know that I have to walk my talk and talk my walk. And if those things aren't congruent, I'm just out of luck.
Heroes are an inspiring group of people. Every one of them, from the larger-than-life comic book heroes you see on the big silver screen, to everyday heroes that let us live the privileged lives we do. Every hero has a story to tell, from the doctor saving lives at your local hospital, to the war veteran down the street who risked his life for our freedom, to the police officers and the firefighters who risk their safety to ensure ours. Every hero is special and every story worth telling. But there is one class of heroes that I think is often ignored: the entrepreneur, the creator, the producer, the ones who look at the problems in this world and think to themselves, you know what, I can fix that. I can help people. I can make a difference. Then they go out and do exactly that by creating a new product or introducing a new service. Some go on to change the world. Others make a world of difference to their customers. Welcome to The Hero Show. Join us as we pull back the masks on the world's finest heropreneurs and learn the secrets to their powers, their success, and their influence, so you can use those secrets to attract more sales, make more money, and experience more freedom in your business. I'm your host, Richard Matthews, and we are on in 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome back to The Hero Show. My name is Richard Matthews, and today I have live on the line Alain Hunkins. Are you there?
I am. It's nice to see you. See you, Richard. I'm really excited to be with you today.
Awesome, and hopefully I did an okay job with your French name.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. Yeah, it's not you wouldn't be the first person who has had to struggle with my name. So, yeah.
So you want to know something that cracks me up is I have a really basic name, right? Like Richard is not very difficult to pronounce, but more often than you would ever imagine, I tell people my name is Richard and they respond with, "Oh, Robert?" And I'm like, I don't understand where you're hearing Robert when I say Richard, but probably no less than several hundred times in my life has that happened. And it's always Robert. So
yeah, well, that's a really good example, Richard, of just people are not as rational as we think we are. I mean, there's reasons that we are flawed as communicators, and that just points to it partially.
Yeah, that's one of them. So speaking of, what I want to do real quick is do a quick introduction for my audience who may or may not know who you are, and then we'll dive into your story. So Alain is a sought-after keynote speaker, facilitator, and coach. And you're a leadership expert who connects the science of high performance with the performing art of leadership. So what I want you to do for me real quick, Alain, is tell me a little bit about what your business does, who you serve, and sort of like what your primary problems you solve are.
Sure. Yeah. So I am the founder and CEO of Hunkins Leadership Group. And what I'm about is helping people who are high performers become high performing leaders. Anyone who's ever worked with a bad boss in the world knows that being good at something and being able to lead others is two different skill sets. So I work with individuals, teams, and organizations, either through training or coaching or consulting or speaking, on basically breaking down the magic behind, great leaders, what do? Breaking it down into its component parts and helping people to understand the challenges to implementing those behaviors and giving them specific tools so they can become more effective. How that plays out is either individually or with teams or with companies. What we look at is we get higher levels of productivity, higher levels of profitability. We have increased levels of engagement, lower levels of turnover. And so the list goes on. I mean, clearly when people work in environments with better leaders, better things happen. So my work is all about creating better results through better leadership.
Absolutely. So you said something that stuck out to me, mostly because it's very close to something I tell people all the time. You said that being good at something doesn't always necessarily lead to being good at leading other people to do the same thing. And one of the things that I've done for the longest time is I help clients build education systems, right, that they can then turn around and sell to people who want to learn whatever it is they're teaching. And one of the things I've discovered is that the overwhelming majority of people who are really, really good at doing a thing are not good at teaching other people how to do that thing, right? And the skill of teaching sounds to me like it's very similar to the skill of leading others, in terms of like actually getting a task accomplished. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely, it is. In fact, my background is I think of myself as an adult educator, and that really, I never think of myself as so much as a teacher as I facilitate the learning of others, right? Which is a different reframe, right? So it's how do you help people to do that? And I find that in terms of, I think, as you said, many people can't explain what they do well to others. It's because most of us are too stuck. We're in it. And so it's equally as important to know how you do what you do as opposed to just what it is, because otherwise you have no perspective. And so leaders need to be able to rise up to what we'll call the balcony and see the big picture and see how all the systems interconnect and interrelate, and then also to rise back down to the dance floor and get in there and dance and do the detail stuff and help people alongside, because sometimes we're leading from out front. Sometimes we're leading from the side, sometimes we're leading from behind. And part of leadership wisdom is to know the difference of when you should do what part of it.
Absolutely. So I have a couple of questions on that. So the first one, is just an observation, and the observation for me is that you called it getting up onto the balcony, being able to see it from the top. And one of the things that I refer to that as learning how to separate the stimulus from the response, right?
Yes.
So anything that is that we've mastered, you don't have to think about all the steps in between, right? So if I were to
Yes.
chuck a chocolate bar at you right now, your hand would go up in the air and you catch the chocolate bar, and your salivary glands would start going because you have chocolate now, right? All those things would happen with no mental like interaction, right? You
Yes.
didn't you didn't calculate the trajectory of the thing, in your head. You didn't put your hand in the right spot. Like it all just happened. And it's because you've mastered all of the skills in there so far that the stimulus and the response are immediate. And if I'm hearing you correctly, what a leader needs to learn how to do is they need to learn how to separate those and pull them apart, the stimulus from the response, and see all the decisions that are happening, right? All the little things that are happening, so they can teach someone else. When you get this stimulus, here's how we're making these decisions. Here's how we're making these decisions. Does that sound right?
Oh, it sounds completely right. Yeah. I mean, as you think about that, the way you describe that, that makes me think about, you might be familiar with the spectrum of what they call conscious and unconscious competence, right? Is that the fact is when someone is a brand new, they have no idea how to do anything, we can call them unconsciously incompetent, right? That they don't know what they don't know and they can't do anything. And then someone says, hey, we're going to teach you how to, let's say, fly a plane. And then like, this is how it works. And you realize, oh, I now know that I can't do that. So you're now consciously incompetent, right? And then what you need to do is then learn how, like the steps, or you could say for driving a car, I mean, anything, any of these steps. And then you get to a place where if you remember back to being in driver's ed, like we'll switch from the plane to the
Yeah.
car so more people can connect to this one. But if you learn how to remember that those first moments of like, okay, turn, like put your foot on the brake, hands here, like, and the amount of mental focus at every single little step, at that point, you're trying to develop conscious competence. Well, fast forward 20 years later or 10 years later, and you're driving and hopefully you're not checking your cell phone and turning the radio on and eating a sandwich. And, this is all happening at the unconscious competent level. And so what you just said, Richard, is, yeah, so if you want to train or lead others and help them learn how to do this, you need to step back out of unconscious competence and step back into the conscious piece and then break down the competency into its component behaviors so that you can teach others and bring them along this journey of competence with you.
Yeah. So my secondary question, I think, dovetails really nicely into that, and that is when it comes to leadership, a lot of times you are stuck in a place where the thing that you need to have your team do is something that you do not have skills in. You have no level of competence at all in doing that thing. So one of the things that's really common in our world is design work, right? A lot of people are like, design work is a very creative thing, and you need to, to hire a designer to do that. But when you're trying to lead, say, your design team, if you're not a designer, that's just an example, but there's a lot of different things, right? Maybe it's coding, maybe it's, something that's going on where you're like, I need this thing to happen in my business, but the only thing that I know that it needs to happen is that it needs to happen. Not, I don't know, I don't have any of the confidence in there. So how do you lead when you're in that capacity?
Oh, I love this question. This is great. So, how you lead in this capacity is you know where you want to get to. So, what you need to do is actually coach the skilled person to give you signposts to know if they're actually on the way to get you where you want to go. What I mean by this is, let's say, for example, like let's use our example of design work. And I'm not a designer, let's say, but I know I bring in these designers. So first of all, I know what I need at the end. So the first thing I want to establish is the end in mind. Here's our target. And let me explain, when this is all working, these are the things that we can do. And getting your designer, whoever you're hiring, to agree to that. Great. So then you say to them, help me to understand. And this is what the part that a lot of leaders have a hard time with, because this means lowering your status and your ego, because you have to admit, I don't know everything. So great, help me to understand. Walk me through what the process of this is going to look like, going from where we are now to this end result. Thank you. So they walk you through that. Great. Can you now walk me through what are some key milestones of things that we know that we're getting so we can achieve along the way? And so you have them walk that. And great. So you say, thank you. Let's build in some checkpoints about how things are going with the milestones, and you can explain this. So that way you're not completely in the dark and at the whim of someone who's an expert and you have no idea. But what you've actually had them do is you've had them scope out the project and build in the project timelines and status update points for you. And you're just checking in to make sure they're on track, even though you have no skills. So that's the way I focus on it. But that takes a lot more communication skills than a lot of people have, because you have to be really clever, because most of us tend to rely on, but I just know how to do this. So that's where you'd go.
Yeah, yeah. And I know I just had a friend who went through this experience, and I remember coaching him through the process where he's like, he wanted to get something coded and developed for his company, and he hired someone to do it. And I was walking him through, and he came back, he's like, he's asking me a question that I don't know the answer, like, and I don't know how to respond to him with this question. And I was like, what you need to do is tell him that's where you're at. Be like, I'm not a coder. I don't understand how you framed that question. Can you please explain these couple of words that I don't understand? So I have better context for it, right? So you're actually, you might be leading the project, but sometimes you have to come down and be like, hey, you're the expert in this area. Please educate me here, and here, so I can have a more informed conversation with you, right?
Yeah.
And the more you do that with your team, that's where I think at least you're going to pick up a lot of those skills. Right? You don't have to necessarily be the one who's pushing the keyboard and becoming a designer or becoming a coder, but you'll start to learn how to communicate in their language when you ask them to teach you their language.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this idea of translating things from what's inside people's minds, whether that's the expert that is coming in to code, whether it's your customer, it's like, help me to understand, what does this look like to you? And if people start throwing out language you don't understand, pause and say, help me understand. I don't get that. Can you explain that in a different way? Give me some examples, whatever it is. The challenge that I think so many entrepreneurs have is that we're afraid of looking stupid. We're afraid of going, like, if I do that, what are they going to think about me? Well, what are they going to think about you if you build something wrong? I think they'd rather hear the question now than not. I mean, the typical example, I work in some mid-sized and large organizations. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have been through the experience where they're in a meeting and people start throwing out acronyms and they have no idea what the acronym is, but they're not comfortable speaking up and saying, excuse me, what did you just say? Because now we're speaking alphabet soup and no one knows what's going on. So yeah, we've got to lower the ego bar so that we can have conversations that lead to understanding, as opposed to these conversations that are just about trying to impress people with how smart we are.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for my own part, my years of experience doing this, my piece of advice for anyone who's listening to this conversation is the other person is not thinking about you, right?
Not at all.
They're not thinking about how it's going to impact your ego, and probably the most likely outcome is that you're going to say, hey, I don't understand that, and they're going to feel good about themselves because they're like, oh, I know something that the leader in this case doesn't know, right? And it'll make them respect you, and they'll feel good. It's a win-win kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm very much so. It's that willingness to, I call it, go low status. This whole, one of the unspoken things around leadership is that in most places there's a power, there's a pecking order, there's a status, and where are you on that? And we send all sorts of spoken and unspoken signals around that. So as leaders, one way to invite other people's engagement is to lower our status consciously, as opposed to just kind of going along, because it's so easy to fall into the traps of, because I'm in charge, that's why, and I'll take this commanding voice and tell you this, and you just follow me. And that is so old school industrial age. It's kind of sickening.
Yeah. So it reminds me of one of the YouTube channels I watch, which I'm going to plug them even though they don't even know who I am. Is Equipped to Endure, and they talk about a lot of man things, right? Things like how to protect your house and how to fire a gun, all sorts of cool stuff like that, right? Tactical things. And one of the things he said in a video recently, which really stuck with me, was if you, he's like, you want to be the most dangerous person in the room, but you don't want anyone else to know it, right? And the same kind of thing with the leader, being the leader. It's you may or may not be, right, like, the head honcho in the room, the top guy in the room, but you want to conduct yourself like everyone else is better, faster, stronger, more expert than you are, right? And treat them that way. And it'll help. At least it helps engender the whole team aspect of getting things done.
Oh, yeah. And certainly for the long term, it's really important. I mean, I like to say that we're trying to move away from being the commanders in chief to being the facilitators in chief. And some people have said, "Look,
like that.
Facilitator sounds so soft than command." I'm like, well, it's different. You've got to let go of your ego as the who wants to be seen. And if your primary objective in leading is about power and status and being seen, you're totally in it for the wrong reasons. And there's going to be a limit to growth because we are all basically being supported by relationships. And in the long term, you're going to be way more powerful and get way more status by actually enabling other people to come on this journey with you than trying to command them in some way.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about how you got to the place where you're teaching and helping other companies like that. We call this the origin story, right? Every good comic book hero has an origin story. It's the thing that made them into the hero they are today. We want to hear that story. Were you born a hero? Were you bit by a radioactive spider that made you want to teach leadership to companies? Where did you start in a job and eventually move to become an entrepreneur? Basically, I don't know where you came from.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because certainly getting involved in training and teaching leadership isn't something that any 5 or 6-year-old thinks about. It certainly wasn't something I even knew existed back then. But if I had to look at the common thread around my origin story, it's I have always been really interested in people, specifically what makes people tick and how do people impact other people with how they tick, right? How they behave. So that's really important. And as I look at like the through line beyond that, a lot of it has to do with my childhood. And, I think a lot of us are impacted because our home life is our first organization that we work in, right? As a child, right? We're part of that team. And it was at the time, I didn't think it was unusual because it's what it's all there is. So you think, oh, this is just the home I grew up in. Well, I found out later on that it was a fairly unusual place to be. And so I grew up in New York City. That's not unusual. I was raised by a single mom, also not unusual. The unusual part is that my mom and my grandmother, my mom's mom, who also raised me because my grandmother moved in with us when I was 1, both my grandmother and my mom are Holocaust survivors. They're born in Belgium. And so that experience of surviving the war, my mom was in hiding from the time she was 6 until she was 9.5, 3.5 years separated through the Belgian underground. And then they were reunited. The rest of the family was killed. That shaped their experience of the world. And it certainly shaped their experience of how they raised me. And here I grew up in New York City. I went to public schools, and my experience at school and going to my friends' houses was so different from my own. And I think there was a part of me trying to reconcile, like, why is one of these things so not like the other? And so it got me interested in studying psychology. Like I was a kid, I was reading books about psychology, and I was reading like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Who's the one who wrote, by the way, about between stimulus and response, there is a choice. And then that choice is your freedom, and that freedom is your power to choose. I know you're talking about stimulus and response. So for me, a lot of this was really informed by that experience. And what I found, and I ended up doing a personal development workshop when I was about 25. And I started realizing, oh my gosh, there are other people who have these rich internal lives, because it's not something I'd ever talked about. But I walked away from this weekend training and I was just on fire. Like, oh my gosh, this sense of touching into my own innate potential was like getting bitten by the radioactive spider. Like, this is amazing. And so I wanted to get involved, and I started volunteering to be a support third level string facilitator to help just kind of observe, be a fly on the wall in these kind of personal growth trainings. And I went, oh my gosh, this is great. And what I found was there was nothing more satisfying than turning on the light bulb in somebody else, right? How do I kindle the fire of brilliance in somebody else? And that passion, I mean, I to this day, there's really nothing that's much more exciting than that to me. Like, there's nothing that feels more rewarding, more meaningful. And so I started getting involved with this at the age of 24, 25, and I was doing educational training in schools. My background, actually trained as a professional actor, and I got working with an arts and education company teaching kids conflict resolution skills and assertiveness training and all sorts of things in New York City. And then a friend of mine said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing training in corporate groups?" I thought, "No, I never worked with corporate groups." So I ended up
a bit better too.
it exactly. So that was one of the things too, because I was literally working in schools. I was teaching 5 classes a day, and I think the day rate was, I think, $75 a day was getting paid. So it was like I was looking long term, thinking this may not be so sustainable, you know. So anyway, I ended up switching, and then from there, I ended up working both in for-profit and not-for-profit. I've just kind of worked with everyone and anyone because the common denominator are people. So for me, just cultivating that, and then as I got into focusing on people, I realized that, oh, I was interested in leaders because I thought leaders make a difference. And what I found through all of my practice and then my research is that leaders don't make a difference. Leaders are, in fact, they are the difference, that they create so much of the variance in culture. And as you know, Peter Drucker famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so getting the culture right, getting the behaviors right is so important. So that's what got me into leadership development. And that was about 20 years ago. And so it's been going ever since. So I guess that was the bug that bit me.
It's funny. I was actually on a podcast called Culture Eats Strategy based on that quote a few weeks ago.
Cool.
And talked about the same kind of things. But yeah, so my interesting sort of question about that whole origin story is when did you sort of make the shift into turning it into a business where you're actively seeking clients? And how does that transition go from learning how to teach what it is you teach to learning how to run the whole like business aspect of it, right? Which is like, having clients, dealing with, payments and accounting and marketing and all the other stuff that goes into running a business, doing what you do.
Yeah. So for me, I started in the doing the work itself, basically subcontracting out to other companies, right? So I was working, doing that stuff. And what I found was I was changing and upgrading their content, changing it all around. I think, great, I can do this myself. I could do. So I started reaching out to other people and they said, hey, come do this. So a lot of it was learning as I go. Like, oh, how do you invoice someone? What does that look like? What is net? I remember like you're talking about asking stupid questions. What does net 30 mean? They said net 30. Like I had to look that up. Like, oh, that's payment terms. I understand.
I remember looking that up too.
Yeah, of course. Like
someone's like, do you offer net 30 terms? I was like, I don't know. Do I?
Exactly. So, figuring things like that. So I think there's been a lot of, it's kind of trial and error. You try stuff and like, oh, that doesn't work. Like marketing, branding. I've gone through so many iterations, and I think it's like they talk about when I first got a website, I kind of came up before the internet really was going, and someone said, you got to understand your website is like a painting that never dries. There's constant iteration. And I just love that idea of so many aspects of building a business are like a painting that never dries. And I think entrepreneurs that are really successful share they share a bunch of stuff, but I think there's one superpower, and it's not very sexy. It's consistent action, right? I'm sure you've talked about this with other people because it's such a key thing, which is, do you follow up? Do you do something every day to move your business forward? And do you look up to see how it's going every so often? You can't just work at the same stuff, and then change your approach if it's not working, and but you've got to try stuff. I'm amazed at how many people say, oh, you're going to go on podcasts. Like, what's the ROI on that? It's like, I'm in seed planting mode right now. Like when you're planting seeds, you're not pulling those seeds out of the ground and go, why aren't you growing yet? Like, so there's a season for all these things. And no, there's a time to reinvest. And so where am I researching? Where am I hiring somebody else to do something instead of doing it myself? Where does it make sense for me to do something myself? I mean, these are all the questions that I think all of us as entrepreneurs are continually asking. And there's no magic wand. It's trying to figure out what's working and then keep doing more of it. But the key thing is consistent action. And because I don't know about you, Richard, I have found that where the opportunities end up coming from are never where I expected them from. Somebody's like, oh, I heard you on this podcast, or,
never.
oh, I read this book, your book, and this, like, I would have never dreamed that I would have, a few weeks ago, I found myself on a symposium panel that was being sponsored by the New Delhi Institute of Management, which is sort of like the Harvard Business School of India. And I got there through like I was on a podcast and someone heard me and they said, hey, talk to this guy. And then before you know it, I'm doing this symposium panel and making great friends with everyone. But I never would have dreamed of that a few months ago. So it's all a question of continuing to put yourself out there and doing stuff and making it happen.
Yeah, yeah. And to further that point, one of the things that I've learned over the course of the last 10 years is that it is not about the volume of things that you do. It's about doing the right thing over and over and over again.
Yes.
Right. And the hardest part about that is you don't always know what the right things are.
Yeah.
Which is where people get tricked into trying to do the whole volume of things. Maybe I'll just do everything and work myself till I die.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I found is when I started, because early in my entrepreneurial career, I was the kid who was, well, if I work 15 hours a day and only take breaks for sleeping and eating, then I'll get to where I want to go faster.
Yeah.
And you find out that doesn't actually work.
No.
Because you're not actually focused on doing the right things. You're focused on you've asked yourself the wrong question, essentially.
Yeah.
And when I started reducing the amount of time I was willing to work, my business started exploding. So what's interesting to me is that consistent action, it's not a consistent volume or consistent time. It's like consistently doing something that what you said earlier was it pushes your business forward, right? It doesn't have to push it forward far, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, like, sometimes I've been like, if I've got stuff I want to get done with my family, or we're traveling or exploring, right? People who watch this show know that we travel full time. Is like sometimes I'll be like, I want to finish this row of copy on our website, and if I accomplish that today, I'm good, right? And then tomorrow I'll come back and finish the next row of copy on the website, right? Yeah. And it's like the stuff that I know needs to get done, and if you do something every day that pushes your business forward to the next stage, that stuff compounds really, really quick. And then the other thing that happens when you start restricting, like, hey, I'm only going to work 4 hours a day, or I'm only going to work 4 days a week, or whatever it is, you start thinking to yourself, okay, I don't have a lot of time to work today. What's the most important thing I can get done?
Yeah.
And you ask yourself better questions, right? And you start getting better answers. And if you actually follow through on those things consistently, really grows your business fast.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, all those things are so true. And like you said, you don't know what those right things are sometimes. So there is some trial and error. And you do need to try stuff. I mean, one thing that I think a mentor of mine told me said, as you're picking those things, you also got to notice, like, for example, they said, yeah, you do need to network, but there's different ways in which you network. So I know that for me, going to a business networking international breakfast meeting 4 days a week, which some people love to like get out there and do that. I mean, a little harder when you're sort of locked in quarantine, but still some people love that stuff. I mean, to me, I'd rather spend 4 mornings getting root canal. I mean, I'd rather do that. It's just not my thing. Whereas
4 podcasts instead.
Yeah, exactly. I do 4 podcasts in a day because these energize me. I get to meet. So just knowing what is going to be something that you can sustain over time, because it's going to be really hard to do stuff long term when you're just thinking, I'm doing this because someone said I should be doing this. It's like it's not a great way to continue.
And for me, one of the things, like, on that same line of thinking, when I found something I know that works that doesn't energize me, those are the things I know I need to hire.
Yeah.
Right. I need to get someone who's going to do those things for me. So I'm like, okay, this is working. I need to get it going. For me, if it's everything that happens, like on this podcast, after we hit that stop record button, everything that happens on the other side of that, I would rather have root now. So I have a team in place that handles all of that now. And it makes this part that I love doing so much easier to get on my plate and do every day. Right. Yeah. Where I've got guests coming on 3, 4, 5 times a week, working on other people's podcasts 5 times a week. And it really helps push you out there. And, to your point, right, if you do that consistently, we've been doing it consistently for a couple of years now, your business looks really different when you have 140 plus recorded interviews on your show and you've got 30, 40 plus interviews on other people's shows. People know who you are, right? Or if they don't know who you are and they look you up, you're everywhere, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's interesting that when you find something that works, You just have to, if it doesn't energize you, you have to figure out a way to make sure that you can get it done, still get it done. And that's where like learning how to hire and become a leader in your own business comes in.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So my next question for you then is about your superpowers. Right? So we say every iconic hero has a superpower, whether it's a fancy flying suit or the ability to call down thunder from the sky. In the real world, heroes have what I call a zone of genius. Right? It's a skill or set of skills that either you were born with or developed over time that really energize everything else you do. Right? So they're the ones, the common thread that sort of makes all of your skills sort of come together. And for you, it helps you help people play the villains in their life.
Yeah.
So with that framing, what do you think your superpower is?
Interesting. So can I say that I'm able to blow things up? No, that wouldn't be it. That's just when I make mistakes. No, actually, I think so. For me, my superpower, and this is true whether it's writing a book or it's when I'm coaching or I'm speaking, is I have the ability to take complex ideas and not just make them simple, but make them super engaging and actionable. And I do that through telling stories, constantly. So for example, when I start, like the beginning of my book, it's the same story as I share in my TED Talk, which is around, the point what I wanted to make was that leading is complex and leaders aren't necessarily very good. And I found this amazing story that in 2007, the leaders of this large, well-known organization had this problem where their customer service wasn't keeping pace with their customer expectations. And so they did 87-page strategic report, and they found that the biggest issue was that their customers felt like they were waiting in line too long. And so what did they decide to do? In their infinite wisdom, they took all the clocks out of their retail lobbies. That's how they dealt with it, right? The U.S. Post Office, true story. This actually happened. The U.S. Post Office, and out of 23 lobbies, it's amazing. You read that story, I was like, oh, this is such a good story. So like I use it, but again, it brings it to life of, shake my head, SMH, shake my head. I can't believe that leaders do that. Yes, I can, because leaders do stupid stuff. So again, it stays with you because the power of storytelling. So I'd say my superpower is taking concepts and bringing them and engaging people in the process. Remember, I trained as a performing artist, as an actor. So like part of this is bringing people on the journey with me and being excited for them too. Because ultimately what I want is people to be excited about their own potential and seeing glimmers of it coming to life right here and right now.
Absolutely. So I love that skill, that superpower, so to speak. It's one of my favorite things that I do as well. I call it putting the cookies on the lower shelf. Right. So you make it accessible to everyone, so that the toddler can get the Oreos.
I love that.
But to your point, one of the things that I had a mentor say to me once, which just blew my mind at the time, was, but after you hear it, you're like, oh, of course, that's totally true. But he was like, any information you give someone, how-to information, why-to information, anything that you give them, information without stories is just data, right? And so it was like, it's if you want to, or it's like, it's just a nail, right? Yeah. It's like, if you want to drive it home, you have to have the hammer, and the stories are what drive the nail in. It's what actually makes things work. Otherwise, you just are giving people a box of nails.
Yeah.
And so the ability to connect the information that you want someone to have with a story is the key aspect of helping someone learn, and then most importantly, implement on it. Right? Because without the stories, they just have data in their heads. They're not going to do anything with it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I've been fascinated by, is like how that works with people.
I love that analogy, by the way, of the hammer and the nail, with the nail being data and the stories being the hammer.
Yeah. Because the stories drive things home, and right. So for me, I tell people that humans are a story-born people, right? So we judge everything on stories, right? Particularly our relationships, right? So you and I are closer friends than we were when we started, because we've shared some stories with each other, right? And the more stories we share with each other, the closer our relationship becomes, right? Yeah. And that goes from an acquaintance is someone whose name you know but story you don't, right? A friend might be someone who you know some stories from each other. A best friend might be someone who you have shared all of your stories together already, right? And you can't tell them any new stories they haven't already heard. So the only way to deepen your relationship is to go and create new stories together, right? To have experiences together.
Exactly.
And that's so that works in relationships, but it's also it's how human beings interact with their world. We interact via story.
Yeah.
So being able to educate and teach via story is such an important skill.
Yes. That's terrific. And I think also when friends are so good that they know each other's stories, I guess the other thing you can do that's fun is you can find new people and tell those stories together, because that's always a fun.
That's also
like,
true,
right? It's like, oh, well, you tell your no, you tell it this time. Now you tell it. So it's good.
Yeah. So the flip side then of the superpower is your fatal flaw. All right. So every Superman has his kryptonite. Every Wonder Woman has their bracelets of victory. They can't remove without going mad. You probably have a flaw in your life or in your business that's held you back, something that you've struggled with. For me, a couple of things that I struggled with over time, things like perfectionism that kept me from shipping product, or a lack of self-care, which meant I let my clients walk all over me. Or probably my biggest one is being a visionary, but being really, really bad at the minutia. So didn't have the discipline to implement on the things that I wanted to get done. But more important than the flaw, I think, is how have you worked to rectify it? So people who are listening to the show might learn a little bit from your experience.
Yeah, that's funny. I can resonate with a few of your flaws there. So thank you for the honesty on that, Richard. So for me, I sometimes describe myself as a recovering perfectionist, and there's a couple of pieces to that, and that had for a long time held me back because I felt that somehow if I didn't get it right, then I shouldn't put it out there. And in my mind, right was this: I had put the bar so high, it kept me from trying stuff. It was easy just to, oh, it's not going to happen, not going to happen. And then the flip side of that was I would spend so much time focusing on getting one little thing right. I was like shining like this little tiny gem. It's like realizing, oh, you realize a whole truckload of other gems just went by while you were so busy shining the one. So I was losing perspective. And I had this great mentor who said something to me. He said, Alain, you know what your problem is that you approach everything like you're trying to get 100 on a test. And there's a lot of tests in life that are just pass fail. Like you don't need to get 100 on lots of pass fail tests. And I got to say, that sounds kind of pretty obvious, but it hit me like a ton of bricks at the time, because I was like, oh my gosh, that so sounds like me. Because yeah, I would worry about the littlest things. And how is this going to seem? And how is that going to seem? And it's just that what I have found is the best entrepreneurs in a lot of ways, actually, they don't have too much of that self-reflection, because yes, you need to reflect, but then you need to execute and drive and go. Like you said, ship. Like, let's get this going and let's learn from the active iteration of doing it, as opposed to
ship and iterate.
Yeah, ship and iterate, exactly. As opposed to, oh, what do you think? And what are they like? We don't know. And in fact, we won't know. There's no way we're going to be able to figure it out. So us just spending more time ruminating and going over this again and again is not going to lead us there. So for me, that has definitely been a fatal flaw. And I'd also say, connected with that early on, I was a big part of my upbringing, and I was a really good student in school. And in school, if you do good work, you get good grades and you get seen and promoted in that. And then when you get out of school, those rules don't apply. And as someone said to me, unfortunately, too many of us live under the myth that good work should speak for itself. I said, look, if good work spoke for itself, the field of marketing wouldn't exist. The fact is, you do need to toot your own horn, and you got to find the right way to do that so it doesn't come across too obnoxious. But if you just do great work but no one knows about it, it's like the work didn't exist. And so the willingness to put yourself out there and frame what you do in a way that's of value to other people is a really important skill. And I wish I had learned that sooner, and I'm still working on getting better at it. So those are a couple of my flaws, I'd say.
So on the first one, the perfectionism thing, I had the metaphor that hit me like a ton of bricks that really helped me with that was another friend and a close friend of mine said that he was like, Richard, perfectionism is the lowest standard you can hold yourself to.
That's interesting.
And I was like, ow, like why? And she was like, because it doesn't exist, you can't hit it.
Yeah.
Right. So if it doesn't exist, you can't hit it. It's the lowest possible standard. You're setting yourself up to not do anything, right? To not ship. And if if that's your goal, if your goal is to not shift, if your goal is to not make a difference, your goal is not to help people, then sure, go for perfection. That's the lowest goal you can have. And it was like a shift in my head. I was like, oh wow, I am legitimately not helping people by striving for perfection or right now. And so it was just I kind of break
That's in,
real thing.
yeah, that's intense. It's funny. Even as you say that to me, like that's the lowest standard you can have. Part of me goes, "Oh gosh, yeah, you're right." Yeah. So I totally get that one.
You feel it in your gut. And you're like, oh, when you get a that's the whole point story thing, right? When you have a story that drives it home, you're like, oh, there
Yeah,
you go, I get it now.
totally.
And so for me, one of the things that I did to overcome that was learning how to take the last little bit of something and pass it off to someone else on my team, right? Whether that is publishing the episode or pushing the publish button on the article or saying, hey, read this over, and if it's good, get it up on the website or whatever it is. It's just taking the shipping part off of my plate and having a team who's responsible for the shipping thing. Because then I can't get myself into my own like, oh, I can tweak it a bit more, and by
Yeah,
a bit more, I mean for the next 3 years, right?
yeah. Because it's never done, right? 'Cause like you said, there's no perfect, so there's no point in that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's a painting that never dries, so I could always make a few more adjustments, right?
Yeah, yeah. So have you found?
So how have you dealt with that?
Well, one of the things, yeah, I was going to say, one of the things like, on that front, one thing I've done is I've let people into the process sooner. So I show earlier drafts of work to more people. I'm just like, hey, take a look at this. Because part of me is like, yeah, you know what? It is a second or third draft that you're looking at. And I won't show them a first draft because they're usually terrible and I need to edit if I'm writing something. But that is getting people more involved earlier and just being, it's the work, like realizing you're giving me feedback on the work. You're not giving me feedback on my own inherent self-worth as a human being. And learning how to separate those things out is so important. I think for everyone is like, how can you learn to bring other people on? Because like none of us is as smart as all of us. And so the more I can get good minds looking at the stuff and moving things forward, and like you're saying, trusting other people with stuff, like, great, go with it. And let's make that happen. So that's where I go.
Yeah.
Opening them up into the process sooner.
So on your second point, the learning how to market yourself, right? So doing good work doesn't speak for itself, I believe is what you said.
Yeah.
And that's such an interesting thing because I've never heard anyone say that before, but it's such a true thing. And I remember growing up as a kid, I was one of the kids that if I tried at all, school was super easy for me, right? It was like written and designed for people who have my type of personality.
Yeah.
And so school was so easy that I didn't care. And I realized pretty early on that good work doesn't speak for itself. And so it's something I've always sort of had in my head. And I'm curious, just because I'm in the process of raising 4 children, how do you teach that message?
How do you teach the message that good work doesn't speak for itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think good work, wow, in the parenting thing, I think it has to do with the fact that I think that there's a developmental cycle, whereas like certainly in a family system and as well as in school systems, there's a certain amount of hopefully good work does speak for itself. It's almost like you need the structure of that first before you can create the variation, which is it doesn't speak for itself. Because ultimately, let's face it too, yes, you need marketing, but ultimately, after you've gotten someone's attention and they open up the package and they look inside and they go, yeah, that's kind of stinky. It's kind of stinky. So you need to have the good work too. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. It's a question of priorities. It's just thinking that one can exist without the other is kind of crazy. So I think, yeah, I mean, thinking about it from the parenting point of view, it's, well, I'm just thinking about, I have a 13-year-old daughter now. And I mean, I've had her for 13 years, but she's 13 now. And it's like, I suddenly have this 13-year-old daughter. No, I've had her for a while, and she's now 13. And I just look at her social life, and I have a 16-year-old son too, but my daughter's social life is way more complicated. And I hear that's pretty true of girls in general. But I just think about how she needs to kind of, we'll call it marketing, but just in terms of which friends are going to spend time with who and how that works. There's a lot of thinking about all that stuff that's going on. Now, ultimately, what's that like? I ask her like, well, what do you want? Because it's really easy for her to get caught up in what her friends think about her, and she loses sight of what she herself actually wants. And I think as entrepreneurs, to take that analogy, is everyone's going to tell you, what's your success like? So like, what's your income stream going to look like, and how much do you want to make this month or that? What's your vision for this, or in 5 years, what you're going to do? And there's so many other people that can tell you, try to define for you what success looks like. And ultimately, we've all got to define that for ourselves, right? And so that looks like different things for different people.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's been an interesting thing for myself. One learn so the I think that good work speaks for itself, and the perfectionism go along hand in hand a lot, because one of the things that like I struggled with was I want something to be perfect so that the work speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Right. And so and then you realize that like if it's perfect and you put it out there, it doesn't speak for itself, right? Because nobody cares, right? If you build it, nobody comes. You still have to build the roads to it, put up the signs, and invite the people to come, right?
Yeah.
So and you still want it to be good when they show up. But it's been an interesting thing both to learn in my own life and in my own business, and then also like I'm in the process of like trying to educate my children that hey, you have to have good work, but more importantly than having good work, you also have to be able to talk about it, right? You have to be able to I don't know what the word is in the that I'm looking for here, but you have to be able to hold up your work and show it to someone else, and basically like walk them through it and walk them through like why it's good and why it'll help them and why it'll make a difference in their lives. And otherwise, I find myself doing that a lot in the parenting world, where I'm like, hey, you have to do the dishes, right? Here's the story for that, but here's why you have to learn how to do it, do a good job of it. You can't just force them to do good work. You have to also tell them the reasons why they need to do it.
Yeah, and I think also is to catch them doing it right and giving them some praise along the way. I think often as parents, it's so easy to energize negativity, is to notice the things that aren't working. Like, wow, you didn't do this. Wow, you didn't do this. But like, how often do we see parents energizing positivity? Like, wow, you did the dishes. That's amazing. Like, usually you don't get that kind of affect and energy coming at that. So it's really supporting that. Like, hey, I really appreciate the fact that you did that. In fact, this morning my daughter did something. She brought her laundry hamper back up to her room. So just note it. Yeah, it's sort of expected, but just like, hey, thanks for bringing your hamper up and not leaving it down there. So it's just catching those things as you go. It's really important. Yeah.
And I think it probably has a lot to do with the same thing that you do with your team as well. But I've noticed like I make it a practice. Like my kids have a list of chores, and then I will tell them to do the thing, and then as soon as they do it, I thank them for doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for getting that done. I really appreciate it. And it engenders a whole different type of response to getting work done.
Yeah. As you say all this, Richard, it reminds me that, we talked about perfectionism and that we think that good work should speak for itself. But the other piece, and this is another, I will call it a flaw, fatal flaw that I've learned about, is you need to develop relationships with other people. So when it's time to show them the work, that they're there, right? Because otherwise you're doing all this stuff in a vacuum. And so let's say, for example, you do this great work and you have this book, but then you have no network to promote it to. So it's this whole sense of what are you doing to cultivate those relationships with other people, and doing it from this place of, I want to be of help, because you can't wait until the work is out. It's kind of like those people that only go on social media to post their own stuff, but never comment on anybody else's. So the challenge is, how do you continue to nurture and cultivate relationships for the long term? And that's something I wish I knew sooner.
To your point earlier that you made, that you can't, I'm going to lose what I was going to say, but your ability to put it out there and like get someone to do, come and like be a part of it is going to come from, you have to actually like build a network of people. You can't be looking at what the ROI is now.
Yeah.
Right? Because the ROI is going to come later when, when you've built all the relationships, you have the huge network of people, whether that's coming, going to your BNI group, you have the whole local community who knows who you are, or if it's building a podcast like this one or going on podcasts like you're doing. You're building those network of relationships so that when you do launch something, which I believe you're going to be talking at the end of this podcast about something you're launching, you have people to share it with.
Exactly. And it's putting in the work. That's part of the work too, is building those relationships up over time. And how do you find ways to not just have them once, but just sustain them in some way. And that takes some thinking and thinking through smartly.
So my next question for you then is about your common enemy. And I always love this question, but because every superhero has an arch nemesis, right? It's the thing they constantly have to fight against in their world. Right? In the world of business, it takes a lot of forms, but generally speaking, I put it in the context of your clients, right? People you work with every day. And it's a mindset or it's a flaw that you're constantly having to do battle against, right? Have to fight to overcome so that you can get those clients better, cheaper, faster, higher degree of results. What is that thing you're constantly sort of like banging your head against the wall and going, damn, if I had a magic wand, I could just bomb all my clients on the head with it to get rid of this? What would that be?
Oh my gosh, I would say uh, I'm sure everyone can relate to this. I'd say one of the big nemesis around this is there's people like, oh, you've got to come and work with our organization. And then I come in and like, okay, tell me what the issue is. And always like when the issue is like with this, we need this, it's like, okay, but it's always, they end up pointing the finger at somebody else, but it's not me. No, I don't need your work. Somebody else needs it. Right. Somebody else has to do this. See, so, and it's amazing how the blame game gets passed. It's like people will say, mid-level managers like, well, we would, but the senior managers don't. And I go to the senior manager like, oh, I would, but the executive team, they really don't. Go to the executive team. Oh, but it's the CEO. So I go and interview the CEO. Who you think is the buck stop here? Well, you understand, I have a board and shareholders to report to. It's just, there's always someone else out there that somehow if we could only do this, but and part of this too is people just they don't want to let go of, well, that's the way the game is played. It's like, so for example, I'm working with, and this is a very common one, particularly in, once you get outside of smaller companies, but in like mid-size and large companies where they're coming up with departmental budgets and everyone knows this budget game. It's like, well, if I got 100 to do what I did last year, but if I ask for 100, I'll only get 80. So I'll ask for 130 and they'll probably budget 110 and I'll find ways to do it. And then I'll definitely have my 100 to get what I need done. And there's this kind of back and forth. And it's a kind of back and forth. And if you say to people, well, what if you had trust in relationships? That when you said to somebody, when I say 100, 100 actually means 100. So you didn't have to do all these extra rounds of this. Like, but you don't understand. That's the way the game is played. Now, I'm not so naive to think that you can just go and just say that to anybody. But to me, and this is part of the nemesis too, is I think that particularly in businesses, we put up these walls around ego. And it's like, I can't show them. I can't let them see me sweat. I can't, it's like I say, here you go. Like, take a look. Like, I'm sweating. Like, this is vulnerable. This is real life. This is human. And I hope that actually coming out of this pandemic in 2020, people realize, guess what? These are people here. Like, you're probably seeing them on a Zoom screen with a dog or a child running through because they're all home together. It's like, there always was life and work and they're all together. It's called life. So to me, really, I'm kind of digressing around this, but they're connected to me because I think ultimately what it comes down to is how can we, if we say that we want to unlock potential, are we willing to hold up the mirror? Some people are, and particularly the more senior you go in organizations, the more challenging it gets because let's face it, people get comfortable. So there's this kind of weird entropy comfort zone. And I think it's that comfort zone that has people push things off. And people are really good at coming up with excuses for why they won't do stuff. And I think the real challenge is to go, all right, I want to work at this and I need some help and I could use some support. And so that's one of the things I work against is kind of that entropy that people hang out in that comfort zone and want to blame somebody else.
So just to bring it back into the parenting world, one of the things I tell my son all the time, he's 10 years old, and I love the crap out of that boy, but is that if it's not his fault, he can't fix it.
Right.
Right. And I say that to him mostly because I have to say it to myself all the time.
Exactly.
Because if it's not my fault, I can't fix it. So everything that's wrong in my life doesn't matter what it is, right? If my wife is having a bad attitude, if I got a client who's upset, if my dog has diarrhea, it doesn't matter what it is. It's always my fault, right?
Yeah.
And if it's my fault, then I have the power to fix it, right? Whether that changes the diet for the dog or figuring out what's going on with the wife so I can help her through it, whatever, or apologizing to a client because we fucked it up, right?
Yeah.
always my fault. And that's a hard thing to do. So it's one of those things that I always have to tell myself,
Yeah.
right? Like, because the first time something comes up and you're like in some whether it's a question or discussion or something that's coming from a client, your first instinct is always like, yeah, it's over there, and you have to like suck it up and be like, nope, whatever this is, it's my fault. Right?
Yeah.
I have to fix it. Right? Even if it's the client screwed up. If the client screwed up, the client needed to have happen, right? It's
Yeah.
always got to be my fault, or I have no power in the situation.
Now Richard, that's a great example of what we call like an empowering belief, right? That may or may not be true 100% in all situations, but by believing it and holding that, it gives you so much more power to actually start to be proactive and do something about it. And what a valuable thing for any entrepreneur who wants to make things happen, right? To make that happen. It's like, yeah, it's my fault. I can do something about it.
Yeah, my fault. I can do something about it. It's the same thing. Like it's one of those, the customer's always right kind of belief.
Yeah.
Right? The customer may not. Most of the time, it's probably not right. Right. But if you treat them like they are, you have a chance of saving the relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Or more importantly, if you treat them right publicly, then your other customers see that and stay customers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's one of those. It's an empowering belief kind of thing. You just have to realize that sometimes you just have to suck it up and say, hey, it's my fault. How do I fix it?
Yeah. And I think that starting with that also, then you start creating new solutions. As you say this, I'm reminded. So I was I met with a prospective client, and we sat and did a whole conversation over the phone for me to come in and do leadership training for their company. And he sat and walked through about 5 or 6 different things. And I was taking notes as I do, and I was asking follow-up questions. But he got into this whole thing of, I really need my team to be more innovative. And I took a couple notes and I read through them after the call, and I went, I don't really know what this means to them enough. And I thought, well, I could make something up for the proposal. I thought, no, I'm just going to go back and get on a second email and say, hey, you said these things about innovation. As I'm reading through this, I'd love to know more. Can you share more? I'm happy to jump on a phone call, or can you email it to me? And realizing there's the old part of me would have been, you can't do that because you have to look like you're the super consultant and have this figured out. When in fact, no, it's just like you're saying. It's like, reach out. This is my fault. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to ask somebody. And frankly, if somebody came back to me with a courteous email who is like wanting more information to write a better proposal, hats off to you. So it's just reframing how we think people are going to think about us.
Yeah. And the reality is they're probably not thinking about you. When you sent the email back, they're like, oh yeah, like there we go.
Yeah.
And the realization that like in that particular case, it's you're learning to ask better questions, and other smart entrepreneurs recognize better questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And the moment you ask someone a better question, it elevates the level of discussion. People have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah.
So it's a cool thing.
Cool.
So I want to talk about the flip side then of the common enemy, which is your driving force, right? So if your common enemy is what you fight against, your driving force is what you fight for. So just like Spider-Man fights to save New York, or Batman fights to save Gotham, or Google fights to index and categorize all the world's information, what is it that you fight for with your business?
Yeah, this is a simple one because I'm pretty clear on this one for quite some time. So for me, what I'm fighting for is to create this very empowered, vibrant, alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in people, by unlocking their leadership potential. I mean, that's what gets me. That's my mission. That's my purpose. That's what gets me out of bed every day. It's what I think about when I go to sleep and reflect on my day. And I think, did I get to live my mission today? And I'd say 9.5 times out of 10, I get to say, yeah, I did in some way. I'm getting to do it right now with you, for example. So it's like, yep, I get to live it right now.
So I like the phraseology used there, kindling the fire of leadership. And it strikes me as one of the things that I tell people all the time is that one of the reasons we create and are creative is we have that spark of divinity, right, in us, and it's what allows us to have and create value for other people. So just in terms of your mission sounds to me almost like it has a bit of that ripple effect going for it, where if I can help this organization, the amount of good that organization can then go on and do is humongous.
Yes. Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, there's no accident that I'm not trying to kindle the water of brilliance. I mean, fire does spread, right? It's got that flammable sense that just a little match, a little flame can start to do something and start to spread. And the other piece for me around this about kind of kindling the fire, if you think about when you make a fire, when you look for bits of kindling, like what is kindling? Kindling is dead wood. And the idea is, I like to think that a lot of us have dead, tired belief systems that we actually have to mourn and release so that we can embrace these new beliefs. And so I think and this is the part of the work that I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with, because we want to say, oh, just be a better communicator, be a better collaborator, help your team to work together. We don't stop and go, hey, what are those limiting beliefs that you have that are getting in your way? You need to actually take those out and uncover them, look at how they're not serving you, and then find a really good way to burn them so that you can create some new beliefs to take their place. And so to me, that is a big part of unleashing people's potential, is the willingness to really burn up those parts that no longer serve you. Because, I forget, you can't put anything else in a full cup. And so you've got to get rid of the stuff that's not serving you anymore.
One of my favorite companies, just because I love their story and I love how they do their marketing and they do their product development, is Apple Computer. I guess they're just Apple now. And one of the things that fascinated me, I've read all their history all the way back to when they started, and paid pretty close attention to all their device releases. And every time they have a major release of something, they are one of the companies that will intentionally cut things off before they, when they stop serving their purpose. Things like, and really smart I am, but they took FireWire out to replace it with USB, and they cut floppy disks with CD drives. They took CD drives out to put in SSD hard drives, right? And all those things happened significantly before the market was quote unquote ready for it. But it allowed them to push the envelope forward rapidly, right? And we all benefit from their desire to get rid of things that are no longer serving them to 100%, right? If it's not taking in the next 4 or 5 years, they cut it off, whether or not the rest of the industry thinks they should keep it. Yeah. And I always loved that for myself. And I think things in my own business and in my own life, does this serve me now? And if it doesn't, is it worth cutting out and getting rid of? And that whole philosophy it's turned me into a minimalist.
Yeah.
Right. So people who watch the show regularly, they have probably noticed I only own 3 button-up shirts. You only ever see this one and a gray one or a black one or a red one. That's it. That's all I own. And my entire wardrobe is in a single drawer in my desk over here, because that's how I live my life. But it's if it doesn't serve me, I don't keep it. So I always try to figure out, how do you keep everything in your life, whether it's the relationships, if it's your clothes, if it's your tools, if it's the stuff that you have stuffed in your closet, if it's the things that your products and services you're offering in your business, they're not serving now and serving the future plans for your business. You cut them out and get rid of them so you can move forward.
That's terrific. Yeah, I love that.
Speaking of heroic tools, I want to take a few minutes to tell you about a tool we built that powers the Hero Show and is now this show's primary sponsor. Hey there, fellow podcaster. Having a weekly audio and video show on all the major online networks that builds your brand, creates fame, and drives sales for your business doesn't have to be hard. I know it feels that way because you've tried managing your show internally and realize how resource intensive it can be. You felt the pain of pouring 8 to 10 hours of work into just getting 1 hour of content published and promoted all over the place. You see the drain on your resources, but you do it anyways because you know how powerful it is. Heck, you've probably even tried some of those automated solutions and ended up with stuff that makes your brand look cheesy and cheap. That's not helping grow your business. Don't give up though. The struggle ends now. Introducing Push Button Podcasts, a done-for-you service that will help you get your show out every single week without you lifting a finger after you've pushed that stop record button. We handle everything else: uploading, editing, transcribing, writing, research, graphics, publication, and promotion, all done by real humans who know, understand, and care about your brand almost as much as you do. Empowered by our own proprietary technology, our team will let you get back to doing what you love while we handle the rest. Check us out at pushbuttonpodcast.com/hero for 10% off the lifetime of your service with us and see the power of having an audio and video podcast growing and driving micro celebrity status and business in your niche without you having to lift more than a finger to push that stop record button. Again, that's pushbuttonpodcast.com/hero. See you there. And now, back to the Hero Show.
So I do want to talk a little bit about something very practical. So I call this the Hero Tool Belt.
Okay.
And it's like every superhero has their tool belt with awesome gadgets like Batarang or laser eyes or a big magical hammer that you throw and comes back. Talk about one or two in your business every day. It could be anything from your notepad to your calendar to your marketing tools to something you use to deliver your clients, maybe your own mnemonic or something that you think is essential to getting your job done every day.
Sure. There's a couple things that come to mind. One is I am a huge fan of analog tools. I have digital ones too, but I have, and it's actually right next to me here, I have this Franklin planner. I'll show it up on the screen, so I'm not just making this up. It's a compact Franklin planner that I got, I think originally, first year I had this was 1995. And I have all of my appointments also online and stuff, like our appointments and stuff. But there's something about putting things to paper with a pen, which I have right here. I've been taking notes on some of the things you've been saying. It just wires things into my brain differently and reviewing it. So and I still do a daily planning and a weekly planning process that's based on the Franklin Planner method. And for me, that is about sitting through, I've got kind of my big projects and then taking a look at day by day, how can I carve out time? And by the way, this is a sort of a tool that's not a tool because it is involved. My wife laughs at me because if she wants to get a hold of me, good luck, because I have no ringers on my phone, I turn notifications on everything off because I don't want to be disturbed. I have enough busyness going on in my head of what I'm trying to get done. I don't need more input. I'll get to the input later. I'll check my voicemail. I'll check my email, but just dedicated swaths of time because otherwise, and there's all this great research about, people that it takes about 19 minutes to get refocused after you've been interrupted. So our attention and our time is our most valuable resource. So I have this planner. I have a whole system by which I go through to focus on what are the big, like you were saying, what matters the most. So I can go through that. And then there are times where I go, okay, block up, you're done. So that's it. So that's one tool. The other thing that I found too is, now I happen to use HubSpot, which is a CRM system. There are other Salesforce, it's other things, because I just found the other key thing with growing a business I can't remember stuff, and I needed a good system to be able to follow up, to set reminders, and just so using it, whether it's following up, setting tasks, and just being able to track stuff. I think without a CRM system that you will use, and it can be used for a lot of things. A lot of people know this stuff, but it's just, I can't imagine functioning. I just can't. It's like life's too big. There's too many people. There's hundreds of contacts, thousands of contacts. It's like, how are you going to do that? So those are a couple of the tools that I found really useful. I'll throw out a third tool that really helped me when I was writing my book, because like many other people, it's really easy to get distracted when you have a computer that you're got an internet connection on. It's an app called Freedom. I don't know if you know this one, Richard, but basically you purchase it. And what you can do is you can set it so you can lock yourself out of certain websites and you cannot access them for certain periods of time. You can do it. You can lock yourself out. So for me, I know when I start to get, if I'm writing, especially first draft stuff, I get anxious and stress, tension. Part of me wants that release, and I want to go and check the news on a website or check social media. So I would just
YouTube videos.
Watch some YouTube. So I would lock myself out of YouTube. I'd lock myself out of Facebook. I'd lock myself out of some news websites that I would follow, because what it made me to do is to stick with where I was. I just had no escape. And it's funny, because the app is called Freedom, ironically, because the idea is that you're free to actually get deeper, more creative, meaningful work done. And so many people I meet and where I work, so many leaders I coach, I say, if I'm in a room with 20 people, I'll say, so raise your hand if you're working on a project right now that would benefit from you having 2 hours of completely uninterrupted thinking time just to sit with this issue, this problem, and work at it. Every hand in the room goes up. And I say, okay, raise your hand if in the last 2 weeks you've had 2 hours of uninterrupted time to focus on a project like this. Maybe if I'm lucky, 1 hand goes up, maybe 2. That's it. So I think this is the thing that is so in demand. We are so caught up in the treadmill of everything coming at us. So what can we do so that we can be much more responsive instead of reactive to the world that we're working and living in?
Yeah, yeah. And I know with things like, I don't have mine on right now, but the Apple Watch and other things like it, in your phone, there's always notifications going off, bells dinging. And, if you're like me, I live in a 40-foot bus with 4 children, a dog, and a cat, and a wife, right? There's always demands on the attention as well as,
Yeah.
staff and clients. And, our world is literally burning down around us in a few areas of our country, right? So
Yeah.
there's stuff going on, and it's really hard to take that time
Yeah.
and focus on things. And I know one of the things that I have done, and this was for me, it worked really well. So like, my wife is like you, like, yes, stuff down the planner. If I put it in the planner, it's gone. Like it's out of my head, and I'll
Yeah.
never see it again. And might as well just have not done it at all.
Right.
So I can't use a paper planner. I'm the kind of person, like, if I get mailed a check, I have to give it to my wife because I'll accidentally throw it away.
Right.
So like physical mediums don't do good for me. So one of the things that I bought was I bought the iPad as a secondary working computer, but not because it's really good at doing work, but because it's restrictive.
Yeah.
Right. And so it does a couple of things for me. So the first one is that it doesn't have the LTE or cell phone connection or whatever. So it's got the Wi-Fi connection. And so if I hop out of the RV and go down to the little the park or area or something like that, and just put the Wi-Fi button off, I can't get notified. Right?
Yeah.
I can't get notified of anything. I can only work on what's there in front of me. And so that's one of them. It lets me sort of cut the world off. And then it has the single tasking, which is the same sort of thing, right? On my computer, like literally right now, if I hit this little window thing, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like 12 different things open.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the nature of working on a computer and getting kind of work on that. And the iPad doesn't do that. Like it's like you have this thing and that's it.
Yeah.
The secondary to that is I have been working on being more of a CEO and less of a do-it-myself. And one of the things that's really, really easy to do on the iPad is to help manage your team. But it's really, really hard to do the work that they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to spend more and more time using that as my primary device because it forces me to your point, focus on the things I need to be doing.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a lot of this is trial and error, right? Trying to figure out which things are going to work well for you and talking to other friends like, hey, what tools do you like? What are you using? What are you not using? How do you, and always swapping ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I know it's a huge thing, but it's the calendar. Your calendar is like, I live and die by my calendar, and my family, not like my immediate family, but like my parents and then parents, brothers, stuff like that. They're all thinking I'm crazy because they're not entrepreneurs. But my wife's gotten to the point where she's like, yeah, if it's not in the calendar, it's not happening, kind of thing.
Right.
And the more people I talk to on this show, the more you realize how common that is with entrepreneurs, that we live and die by our calendars.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's so much going on every day, because we're constantly planting new seeds, watering them, nurturing them. There's just so many things that you're doing at various times.
Cool. So last couple of questions here. Your own personal heroes, right? So every hero has their mentors. Frodo had Gandalf, Luke had Obi-Wan, Robert Kiyosaki had his rich dad, Spider-Man has Uncle Ben. Who were some of your heroes? Were they real life speakers, mentors, authors, peers who were a couple years ahead of you? How important were they? What you've accomplished so far?
Great question. I've been lucky enough to have a lot of mentors. A lot of them are people you wouldn't have heard of. They have been people who, and it's funny because I get asked about mentors, like, do I go to somebody and say, will you be my mentor? And I said, whoa, that's a lot of pressure. Like, don't put the big capital M on it. Like, keep it lowercase m. And I wouldn't even get into the, would you be my mentor? Because what does that mean as opposed to, what do you want mentoring around? Like, could you help me with it? Talk about the subject. But so for me, there's a few people that have certainly mentors, personal people I've known. And I write about some of these guys in my book. I have a guy named Gary Zaremba, who I've known for years. I still reach out to, who's older than me and has a very successful construction business. And I've asked him a lot of questions along the way. A mentor named Jeff Altman, who I write about in the book as well. who I've known, has mentored me a lot around coaching and leadership and thinking about putting my brand out there in all sorts of ways. So those are two that come to mind. In terms of some other heroes, Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner are the co-authors of a book, The Leadership Challenge, which I highly recommend. And the reason it's one of the best leadership books, and it's one of the most popular. It's now, I think, in its 6th edition. They've sold millions and millions of copies. Is what they did is they took leadership off of the pedestal and they democratized it, and they broke it down into the behaviors that we were talking about earlier. And so they are heroes of mine in terms of the commitment to great storytelling, great research, and great application of the principles. And so they inspired me in many ways. In fact, a thrill for me was that they both agreed to endorse my book. It's like, wow, I got to get to connect with them. I haven't met them in person, but we've had some wonderful correspondences. And I just think the world of the work that they do. And they inspire me because I've watched their talks and listened to them. And they inspire me to be focused on helping people. Like if you said, why do you do what you do? Yeah, would I like to be recognized for the work that I do? But I'd be more jazzed by helping people. Like ultimately, like I said earlier, seeing the lights go on as people kindle that fire, there's really no greater gift than that. And so people like Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner have inspired me to keep going and just helping people to become the leaders that our world really needs.
Yeah, I always love just listening to that question. Everyone has their story of, who their heroes are. And sometimes they're famous people. Most of the time, they're just other people in their life who stepped up when you needed it, whether they know it or not.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, Richard, because actually Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner did some research around this whole question of who are the leaders that you admire the most. And it turns out it's not the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, Nelson Mandela's, Mother Teresa's of the world. It turns out who are the leaders that you admire and that you have influenced you the most. It turns out to be my 4th grade teacher, my grandmother, right? It's my basketball coach. It's those people who have had a personal, real relationship with you. They're the ones who actually have, not only have they impacted you, but to me, that tells me, wow, that's the kind of impact that I am having on somebody else. Not that I could have. The fact is, I am having. Now, the question is, what kind of impact is it that I'm actually creating? That every single person I talk to, that is an impact that I'm creating. The question is, what kind will it be?
That is the reason why I asked that question, is to help more people realize that you are a hero in someone else's life, whether or not you know it.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember one of my mentors said to me when I was a young kid. Actually, when I say young kid, I was like 17 or 18. And I say he's saying it to me, but he was actually saying it to an audience of people. But I feel like he was calling me out directly. He said, "Your kids someday are going to have a hero. It damn well better be you."
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And it was just it was something that clicked in my head and realized that, hey, you know what? If there was people in your life that you're going to influence, and you live your life in a way that you're worthy of the influence you're going to have.
Yeah. So. I love that. That's impactful. It damn well better be you. That's great. Thank you.
Damn well better be you. So, last question for you here is your guiding principles. All right. One of the things that makes heroes heroic is that they live by a code. For instance, Batman never kills his enemies. He only brings them to Arkham Asylum. So as we wrap up the interview, let's talk about top 1 or 2 principles you use regularly in your life. Maybe something you wish you knew when you first got started on this whole hero's journey.
Couple of them. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is personal accountability, that my word is my bond. And if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, that I honor my commitments. I feel doubly responsible for that one because I feel like, look, I'm teaching people these principles. And if I don't model them, this whole thing is a giant waste of time. It's like I'm a snake oil salesman. I mean, I get that, it's easier to talk about. So I feel like I've got to live this stuff. So for me, it's about personal accountability. That is by far the first thing. I love the quote from Albert Schweitzer, who said, example is not the main thing in influencing others. It's the only thing. Right? So it's just like so I just know that I have to walk my talk and talk my walk. And if those things aren't congruent, I'm just out of luck. So that's the first thing I'd say. And then I think another principle for me is empathy. I've gotten really in touch with this one in the last few years. And it's really this year, 2020, with the pandemic and everything. You know what? At our core, we are human beings who are very emotional, who happen to think. I don't think we're thinkers who happen to feel. I mean, I'm just more and more convinced of that the older I get. So for me, empathy, I define it as showing people that you understand them and care how they feel. I think that is, if we're going to solve any of these problems, whether it's racial injustice, whether it's coronavirus pandemic, whether it's climate change, it's going to start by being able to take some perspective and step into other people's shoes. And it's going to take some listening and being able to not just listening cognitively, but actually feeling what people feel. And so that's something that's really important to me in what I do and how I teach and how I interact with people. So we'll leave it with accountability and empathy as two of my top superhero codes.
I love the empathy one in particular because my best friend and business partner in a lot of areas, that's his superpower is empathy. And it's interesting how that superpower of his drives a lot of his business decisions that he makes. But where like a normal person like myself has to think about and work at empathy, it just comes so naturally to him that it's so easy to put yourself into someone else's shoes and see the world from their perspective, right? And it's interesting because I say it's his superpower because it comes naturally to him, something that he's just good at, right? But it's not an unattainable skill. It's something that you can learn, and it's something that you can get good at, and it's something that you can and should practice. And the more you practice it, the easier it is to do all the things we've talked about in the show. Everything from learning how to tell your stories, right? If you tell your stories, right, you have to tell your story in the way that the other person's going to hear, right? The way that they're going to feel about it. And I remember, if you've ever read Orson Scott Card, he writes the Ender's Game series.
No, I haven't.
Yeah. If you haven't, the Ender's Game book is it's one of the only sci-fi novels that has sold out every year since it started printing. And like I almost guarantee you, whatever print that you ran this year, it sold out, right? It's sold out every year since 1978 or whatever. And it was listed as having the best opening line of all of literature. But anyways, good book. Fair warning, if you pick it up, you may not sleep. You'll read the whole thing all the way through the night. But beside the point, in the back end of the book, he has a little chapter where he writes as the author of the experience of writing a story. And one of the things he said that really, really stuck out to me is it's the whole empathy piece, is that a story is only ever half done, right? When I write it, it's half of a story. It becomes a story. It becomes alive when the other person hears it or reads it or interacts with the story, right? Because it comes alive in their head. So the whole idea of empathy is realizing that anything that you're doing, right, whether it's writing a story or telling a story or teaching, you're only ever doing half of the work. The other half of it is with the other person that you're interacting with. And that's where the empathy comes in, is learning how to be in that other person's shoes and understand that they have just as much part of whatever the experience is as you do.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you, as you're building out whatever content or product or service, whatever you're trying to do, how do you keep that other person in mind and more in heart as you're considering all that? You're thinking, what would their experience be receiving this, and how can you close that gap as best as possible?
Absolutely. Cool. Well, that is a wrap on our interview. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show, Alain. But I do have one thing I finish all of my interviews with. It's this real simple thing I call it the Hero's Challenge. And it's basically a selfish little thing I do at the end of all of my interviews as a way to get access to stories I might not otherwise find on my own. So the question is simple. Do you have someone in your life or in your network that you think has a cool entrepreneurial story? Who are they? First names are fine. And why should they come on the show and share their story?
The first person that comes to mind is a guy named Ed. And Ed is all about being brave. He's interested. He loves to listen and tell stories about bravery and just what are the things that get in the way of that. And I think that courage and bravery is such an undervalued skill in today's world. And so I think he'd be great to talk about these things.
Awesome. So we'll reach out after the show and see if we can get an introduction to Ed.
For sure.
So for the send-off in comic books, there's always the crowd of people who stand and cheer and clap. for the hero who has done their heroic deeds. So on this show, our analog of that, or was it analog or analogous? I can't remember what the word is. Is basically, where can people find you? All right, where can they light up the bat signals of, you know what, Alain, I would like learn some leadership in my organization. Where can we do that? And I think more importantly than where they can do that is who are the right types of people to raise their hands and say, you know what, yes, I would really like to speak to them.
Great. Yeah, let's start with that second question first. So yeah, if you are interested in taking the next step on moving from being a high performer to a high performing leader, if you have beliefs that you want to take a look at, your mindset and your skill set about what that means, that's the kind of people I'm working with. I work with people who are clearly ready to take that next step and are serious, whether that's individuals and or teams or organizations, whether that's coaching, speaking, training, or consulting. And if you want to reach me, the easiest way to go is check out my book's website page, which is www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. You can read all about the book. You can read the testimonials. You can also download the first chapter of the book for free right there. That page is linked to my AlainHunkins.com website, which is ALAINHUNKINS.com. And on that site, you can learn all about the various services I offer, some of which I just mentioned, as well as one of the things that Richard and I were talking about before we went on air is I'm launching a new project on October the 5th, and there's information about this on the website. It is a online 30-day leadership challenge. It's going to be using a technology platform in just a few minutes a day, helping a small group of committed leaders who are interested in bettering themselves, specific practices using principles from habit formation, positive psychology, and gamification over the course of 30 days. And you can read all about that on the website on the 30-day leadership challenge. And as I mentioned to Richard as well, is I am willing to gift 3 listeners here with spots if they are interested in being as part of that challenge. Is what you can do is you can email me with your name and your email address, and in the memo put down that you heard me, put down hero show in the subject. You need to put your name and your email address and send that to Alain at AlainHunkins.com. That's ALAIN at ALAINHUNKINS.com. And anyway, and we will do, if we get lots of people, we'll do a drawing and have a few people. If it turns out that we get only 3 people, then you'll have spots. But I'm offering 3 complimentary spots for people who want to be a part of this leadership challenge journey and become better leaders.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Alain. It's really, really kind of you to make that offer to our audience. Hopefully people will take that on. If you're listening to this, we'll have all the details, including a link to the email address in the show notes for this episode. So you can get on the website and grab that with, so you can email Alain and see if you can get into that class free. So that's really, really cool. And again, Alain, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate getting to hear your story and getting to chat with you about some of these leadership principles. It's been really fascinating. So again, thank you. And before we hit this little stop record button, do you have any final words of wisdom for the audience?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to thank you, Richard. This has been terrific. I just love the depth of which we've been talking about all this. And I'd say in terms of final words of wisdom, we talked earlier about consistency. I'd say as you are moving forward on this journey, it is not a straight line. Just know that it's going to go all over the place. It's going to 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But the key is to keep going, And not only just to keep going, is find allies, find support of people who can support you on this. I find, entrepreneur, sometimes we think of the hero as being this solitary person, but I mean, look at the Avengers, look how much they do when they work together better to kind of switch back to superheroes.
Yeah.
So find your team of Avengers to take this journey with, because not only will you get farther, you're going to have a lot more fun doing it.
Yeah, and if you watch any of the superhero shows on TV and Netflix and other things, like, what is it, The Flash and Arrow, they all have, it's like Flash is the main hero, but they got his team of people back in the support room that are always communicating with them, watching things, taking care of them. Every Batman has his Robin, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Gotta have a team.
Have a team.
So, again, Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Richard.